I'm mad because I watched one of the greatest Super Bowls I've ever seen, but we ended on a defensive holding call. It just doesn't sit right with me.
Welcome into College Football Today. I'm Emily Proud. You just heard from the coach, Carl Reed. More on why he's mad in a bit, but I have to introduce the rest of our guests today. Look at this full house. We have 24/7 Sports national college football writer Chris Hummer and a very special guest right below me here in the boxes. It's Nigel Burton of the Pac-12 Network. Guys, thank you so much for being here. You know, since Nigel is our guest on this show, I'm gonna go to you first here. What do you think about that call last night?
Listen, I spent many times roaming the secondary when I was a player and was a defensive backs coach or defensive coordinator for about 12 of my 15 years of coaching. And I could not agree with Carl more. We were entertained to one of the greatest Super Bowls. Couldn't wait. I was actually on a plane going through the Oakland airport. People held it around for all of us to sit around and watch somebody take knees for the last 2 minutes of the game because a referee decided that he just hadn't had his name called. So, I absolutely agree. And as much as it was about anything else, I don't really care about the timing. I don't even care about the fact that the player admitted to the fact that, hey, I think I tugged his jersey. What it really was about was the fact that it was inconsistent. It wasn't called that way throughout the game, and you shouldn't call it like that in the last 2 minutes of the game if that's not the way you called it throughout the entire length of the football game. So, Carl, I'm on your side, bro.
Chris, what do you think?
Oh, I was just disappointed. I wanted more than anything. Jalen Hurts played the best game of football I've ever seen him play, going back to his days in high school or college. You could argue
You watched him in high school too, right?
Yeah, I've been watching Jalen Hurts since like 2014.
Yeah.
And I just wanted him to have that moment. He had it in 2016 in the national championship game. He scored a touchdown with 2 minutes left against Clemson. Deshaun Watson obviously changed the course of that narrative by having that arguably pick play to Hunter Renfrow back then, and Jalen didn't have to get to have that moment where he took his team and led him to victory at the last second. And I wanted him to have that chance on a Sunday night, and I felt just disappointed all around. We didn't get to have the great ending that went with the great game.
Nigel said the key thing in his response earlier. It was inconsistent to what had been going on the entire game. You want to have consistency in officiating, consistency in calls. Jalen Hurts still may have lost if that call wasn't made, but the players would have got it to decide it, which I think is important. And calls like that is why we have so many fans who think football is rigged.
I just hate when it comes down to a call. And I played soccer. I'm a big soccer fan, so I'm all for context when you're making these calls. You know, a penalty in the middle of the field isn't really weighed as much as if you're calling it in the box because it's a penalty kick and it's a free shot on goal. So I'm all for like where you are, context in the game, and kind of adding that context into it a little bit. But guys, we have a big show today. We're not here to talk about the Super Bowl. This is a college football show ultimately. So here is what we have on tap for today's show. We got Texas and Oklahoma officially joining the SEC in 2024. So what needs to happen in their last season in the Big 12? We'll debate. Plus what Mike Norvell and his new contract means for the ACC, and also why the Pac-12 should maybe be rebranded as the Pac Portal. Also, new trends suggesting that we are in a new age for black quarterbacks. What's changed? What needs to change? We've got all that and more coming up. But first, guys, let's hit the news here. Texas and OU, as I just said, will join the SEC early in 2024. The Longhorns and Sooners, they just have to pay, an early withdrawal fee of a combined $100 million. And then, a separate fee with Fox just to leave a little bit early. So this will be officially their last season in the Big 12. Carl, I ask you this. What do they need to accomplish this year to make you feel good about these teams moving to the SEC?
They need to finish at the top of the Big 12, and they need to show that they can play and dominate at that level. Because if you can't win the Big 12, you're going to have your hands awfully full in the SEC. And you're going to be full in the SEC anyway. Former Oklahoma great legendary coach Barry Switzer said to the Tulsa World that he wants to know who at Oklahoma made the decision for Oklahoma to go in the SEC. And he was nervous about such a move. We know how competitive the SEC is. We know how tough of a league that is. And you have to show progress in terms of that you can compete at the top of the Big 12 for people to even feel like you have a shot in the SEC.
Yeah, you know what, Carl? I totally agree. And the part that really blew my mind was, as much as it was about Barry Switzer and obviously his legacy at Oklahoma and why they made the move, I was absolutely baffled by Texas. Texas has their own network. They had a pipeline. Money was not an issue for them, and so now they step into a league where, instead of being obviously the cream of the crop and things, now they're going to have an uphill battle. I mean, 8-5 under Steve Sarkisian after losing to Washington in the Alamo Bowl. You got an Oklahoma program that had their first losing season since, I believe, 1998, stepping into the SEC after just one more year in the Big 12. Not only do they have to, I think, be number 1 and number 2 in the Big 12, which I don't think they're going to do. The biggest issue for both those programs, neither one of them plays a lick of defense anymore. And if you don't play defense in the SEC, you don't have a prayer of competing in that conference with those teams. And so I think they have a lot to prove, not just from a wins-loss perspective, but a style of play perspective.
Carl, Nigel, I agree with what you said from a defense perspective, especially Oklahoma with the problems they had on that side of the ball this year. But I have to pivot back to Carl, because Carl, I just need to ask, did I convince you last week with the Texas OU discussion? Because you said they need to win the Big 12 this year and prove they can perform in that league before moving on. And I believe we had a different conversation last week. But I do totally agree with what Carl said on that point. For Texas especially, the expectation is winning the Big 12 this year. They have every advantage compared to the rest of the league. From a roster perspective, the rest of the league, except for maybe Kansas State, at least at the top, got worse with the losses they had. Texas needs to win. Oklahoma, for its part, needs to build on the top 5 recruiting class it had and needs to prove it can hold up along the lines of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. And Oklahoma needs to bounce back from its first losing season since the 90s. Both teams need to make significant strides to take advantage of their last year in the league.
Now, hold on a second, Chris. I didn't say Texas was going to win the Big 12, so don't say. I said they have to show that they can win the Big 12.
And I believe we had the same discussion last week, and you said Texas shouldn't feel like it could win the Big 12 because it hasn't won the Big 12 recently.
Okay, well, in all fairness, at the time you guys had that discussion, we didn't know that they were leaving early, so maybe Carl's opinion changed. He said, they have 2 years before they have to go to the SEC. Now we know that they only have 1 year until they have to go to the SEC. But Carl, I'll ask you this. I mean, I heard Nigel kind of mentioned Texas has a lot of money, right? They have their own network. They have so much going for them, not just in football, but in a lot of other sports as well. So why do they need to leave early?
I didn't understand why they needed to leave at all. I didn't know that. I didn't understand that move. Own network, tons of money. You haven't dominated the Big 12, which is a conference that's nowhere near on the level of the SEC. Texas has been in the football wilderness for over a decade. I mean, it's just been really tough. And I don't know how you go into the SEC and compete at the highest level with the teams you have to play. And I'm going to tell you this. I don't think that you can compete in the SEC with only kids from the state of Texas. You have to also show that you can recruit nationally. We have been proven that hasn't been the case. Texas and Texas A&M are in what is supposed to be the premier state in the country for high school prospects, and man, they have struggled mightily to get over the hump. And I just don't see how that's going to change with going to the SEC.
Hey, Carl, I got the answer. I figured it out. It's one word and it's 3 letters. Ego. Ego made Texas make that move from the Big 12 to the SEC, because going back to our days of watching R.C. Slocum and go back to all those days of watching those great Texas and Texas A&M battles on Thanksgiving weekend, and then they saw their partner bail on them and go to the SEC and have a little bit of success, have a Heisman Trophy winner. And they were sitting back there going like, well, how come we can't have this? We used to beat these guys. We're Texas. And we got hand signals. We got all kinds of stuff that they don't got. What do? They do all this stuff, and they got little guys running around in underoos and things like that. Ego is what made them make this move. And ultimately, I think ego is the thing that's going to punish them for making this move, because again, it wasn't cash. They haven't been able to dominate a weaker conference, just like you guys have all laid out. And ultimately, I think it was the decision of the people who have the ego and the money, but don't actually have to lace them up and run into people. who've decided this is a move we want to make so that we can, have some bragging rights at our dinner parties and things like that. While the young men out there and young ladies who have to go battle in these things are run around with ice bags because they are not ready to compete at that level right now.
It's at least 7 to 8 coaches, Nigel, that are coaching in the SEC that wish that they weren't coaching in the SEC, other than the money that they're going to get when they get fired and get shown the door. It's about 8 guys in that league who wish that they can get a job in the Big 12 or the Pac-12 or the ACC, where it's a little bit calmer than having to deal with the toughness of the SEC. It's not only a big dog league in the field. It is war in recruiting. It's a bloodbath on the recruiting trail, trying to get players. You add an NIL and the money that's involved in the game now. Man, it's tough sledding ahead for the Longhorns. I don't understand the move.
Texas will never be a brand associated with hubris. Texas hasn't had a lot of it in its entire history, and you can debate that either way. I think the decision itself is more about the future than it is the present. Texas could obviously have a better path of winning in the Big 12 year to year if they stayed. Oklahoma, as they proved with, I think, like 5 straight Big 12 titles, clearly had a better path in the Big 12 if they stayed. But this is about money. Revenue for the conferences by the end of the decade is supposed to be about $100 million for the SEC and $100 million for the Big 10. If you're in the Big 12, Pac-12, or ACC, you're looking at less than $50 million. So if you have schools in other conferences making twice what you do a year, you're going to fall behind. We're not far away, I think, from an era where players will have salaries. We're not far away from an era where coaches could be making $15, $20 million a year, and your on-field staffs are going to be huge because I think the NCAA is looking at changes in that as well. And you have to have money to deal with all those resources and have them pulled in. And I think Texas is worried about, even with as much money as in Austin right now, about the future and keeping up with everyone else in college football if you're in a conference that's making half of what another conference is.
Yeah, we know both of these schools have the brand. We know both of them have the recruiting. I mean, they're both wrapping up top 10 recruiting classes. They've got a lot of influx of talent coming in. But Chris, I mean, from your perspective, looking at Oklahoma specifically, they're in a time of transition, right? Year one under Brent Venables, they put up historically bad numbers, specifically on the defensive side of the ball, which is his area. What do you think about their readiness as they set their sights on the SEC and just not this season, but one more?
They're a little behind, but if you look at their recruiting efforts, like Brent Venables, I believe they had the number 4 class in the country in 2023. They loaded up along the defensive line. I think they signed their first 5-star defensive lineman in over a decade. Brent Venables is making the adjustments he needs to get ready for the SEC. I think Oklahoma particularly could have benefited from another year in the Big 12 to build the roster up. Steve Sarkisian's a year ahead in terms of that adjustment process because he's been there a year longer. But Oklahoma just has to get better on the defensive side of the ball. And Brent Venables, frankly, has to find the balance on the defensive side of the ball. He's playing across from the veer and shoot that Jeff Lebby runs. It's a high-paced, fast-tempo offense that we see Tennessee run with such effectiveness. But you don't often see great defensive play across from it because of the tempo that they play with and what it puts on a defense, given the amount of snaps you're going to end up being on the field play to play. So I think Oklahoma needs to find the balance there while also continuing to build up depth along the front 7. That way it can rotate out and keep its best players healthy and energized during the game. Oklahoma had a hard time keeping everybody healthy last year. Wasn't a lot of depth. They're going to have more depth this year after the recruiting gains and some of the transfer portal. But Brent Venables just needs a little bit of time to build that roster up the way he needs to.
Chris, now, Brent Venables was the defensive coordinator at Clemson, and they had some really high-powered offenses that played with some tempo during that time. I think Oklahoma is probably in a better situation than Texas because Venables is known for being a legendary recruiter. There are guys on the recruiting trail who have stories after stories about how legendary Brent Venables is. If you ask people why he was so successful on the defensive side at Clemson, they don't talk a lot about schematics or him being an X's old guru. They talk about his ability to consistently sign first and second round draft picks on the defensive side of the ball and getting those kids to play extremely hard. He's a legendary recruiter, and his ability to restock the talent at Oklahoma, that's going to be the biggest thing that they have to overcome in order to be successful in the SEC, because recruiting in that league is a completely different level.
All right, so Carl says Oklahoma is more ready than Texas. That makes me kind of want to ask the question to everybody else. So real quick, Nigel, what do you think? Who's more ready right now, OU or Texas?
Can I vote for neither? I don't think either one of them is ready for this. And to be honest with you, I think neither one of them is ready for several conferences. I think Oklahoma and Texas would find themselves behind the 8 ball in the Big Ten. And based on the way the Pac-12 is looking next season, I think they'd struggle even in that conference as well. So, and Carl, I want to go back to something that Carl brought up. Having been a guy who was a defensive coordinator and a defensive coach for most of my career, and then stepped up to become a head coach. The problem is you're no longer able to do that day-to-day recruiting. You're not able to close those deals the same way that you were, because you are now a CEO. And by the way, you have a whole nother side of the ball to worry about. So I think some of those old stories of Brent Venables from when he was at Clemson, when that could really be his cash cow, that could be his baby, just worried about signing the next Christian Wilkins, signing the next guy in the secondary. Your play is just so different, and your role is so much different, that I think it's going to be interesting, unless he can find another Brent Venables who can do what he did at Clemson for him at Oklahoma. It's a different animal. And I've been there and I've done it. And when you're dealing with two different sides, I think it's going to be a struggle. If I had to pick one, I would actually probably lean towards Texas, only because of the fact that, I just think Oklahoma is so far behind right now. And, I think that, Texas just at least offensively could compete.
Chris, one word.
I believe the score of the Red River rivalry last year was 49-0
Okay.
Texas. So I think that tells you all you need to know about who's more ready to go.
All right, there we go. I'm going to cast a vote for Texas as well. Got to hold everybody accountable here. Let's move to the ACC, though. Some contract news. Mike Norvell signing an extension through the 2029 season, also making him the second highest paid coach in the conference, behind Dabo Swinney at $8.1 million. 8.05, annually. So my question here, and we'll throw this out to Nigel. I mean, given how rocky his tenure started, he's coming off his first winning season. There's, of course, the Deion Sanders conversation last year, the hot seat. I mean, that was less than a year ago. We were talking about Mike Norvell on the hot seat. How surprising is where we are now, talking contract extension?
As much as we just spent time talking about Oklahoma and Texas, and why would you ever make that move? This is the flip side of that conversation. Mike Norvell was a genius for this, because making the move from Memphis to a situation like Florida State, where your main competition is Clemson. Consider this. You know who came in second place in the Coastal Division? Duke. The Duke Blue Devils came in second place. That's your competition. I mean, there was a point where Syracuse was ranked high and was undefeated. The level of competition, I mean, it's kind of the story of my life, the beneficiary of low expectations. There's just not much to push you in that conference. And so the ability to turn things around very quickly at a place like Florida State, I think, has helped Mike Norvell a ton. Now, we'll see how long this lasts until the people who are fronting this money are saying, okay, now you got to start beating Clemson, and you got to start winning some of these, winning this league consistently. But I think he put himself in a situation much different than what we just talked about.
Mike Norvell is a very good football coach. Florida State, huge turnaround, 10-win season. But when they start paying you like this, you losing to Clemson is not going to be good enough anymore. Florida State is a program historically that has competed and won national championships. It wasn't long ago where Texas A&M gave Jimbo Fisher $10 million a year because he won a national championship at Florida State. Those guys down in Tallahassee think they have a championship program. They think that you should be able to win national championships there. And when they pay you this kind of money, they're telling you loud and clear what the expectations are in Tallahassee. And he has a good shot to win it. Quarterback back, great defensive players back. Florida State is really having an exciting time right now, and they're being talked about, but they will have to deliver on the field this fall.
I think this contract's just the status quo. I think Billy Napier's making $7.3 million for Florida. He just had a losing season. It makes sense Mike Norvell, after a 10-win campaign, would get bumped up into that $8 million range. I believe it makes him 12th nationally in coaching salaries. So that's just kind of the going rate for somebody at a program like Florida State that just had the season he had. Agents remain undefeated in college football. It's a little bit of an aside, and I'll be quick with it. But I just want to point out what the LSU coaching search a couple years ago did to coaching salaries. If you look at the coaching salary rank, Brian Kelly, I believe, is close to 10 million. Mel Tucker's making 9 million a year. Jimbo Fisher's making 9 million a year. Lincoln Riley's making probably around 10 at USC. All four of those guys were connected in the LSU coaching search race a couple of years ago, and they raised the entire salary floor for the rest of college football. A couple of years ago, it was guys like Nick Saban, Dabo Swinney, Kirby Smart who were above $8 million. LSU, by going out and being that aggressive and trying to spend that money, raised the coaching floor for all of these mid-tier college football coaches. And it's totally changed the way we look at coaching salaries. So you might think that $8 million number seems high, but it's just the going rate largely because of what we saw LSU do a couple of years ago.
Okay, so all these athletic directors that are upset about having to pay a little extra for their quarterbacks have LSU to thank. Please transfer your calls towards them. All right, one more final news item that we've got here, and it has to do with the Pac-12. As it readies for just 10 members in the 2024 season, expansion talk, of course, is not quieted whatsoever. The latest here, though, SMU and San Diego State are being targeted as potential new members of the Pac-12. As our Pac-12 analyst here, Nigel, what do you think about the fit of these two schools?
I think it's going to be interesting. I think right now you've got a program in San Diego State that's had some success on the football field, and they've got a brand new stadium that they've built. So they've kind of done all the upgrades necessary to put them in position to make a successful transition, similar to what we saw happen with Utah over a decade ago. I think there's people outside the football world who are scratching their heads a little bit about SMU. But what they're forgetting is the fact that the Pac-12, they really pride themselves on being different, that it's not just sports only, but it's also your fit, your culture, how you brand yourself as a research university and things. And SMU has made a lot of investment on that side, the academic side. They have a $2 billion endowment. They've made a lot of pushes in their research in terms of things in terms of their medical school and things to kind of push themselves into a tier 1 research university. So I think those things fit what I think the Pac-12 presidents are looking for in terms of an academic institution and that fit. So it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening. But I think in the long run, as we've seen teams that have added to the conference, that I think both these schools have a chance to be successful.
I wouldn't term either one of these as exciting additions, but they're additions that make sense, especially when you consider market sizes. And I think this is what this is about. You want your television contract to have as many homes available for viewership as possible. And SMU brings you the Dallas market. San Diego State brings you perhaps some of the California market you lose with USC and UCLA on the way out. So,
hey there.
Yeah, my cat wants to say hi. But yeah.
Sorry, Chris. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I think it's all about markets, and bringing those two schools in at least allows you to bring in some of the television homes you lost by losing the two LA schools. And SMU particularly, I think, has a pretty big ceiling. They're spending at an aggressive level now. They basically got the death penalty like 40 years ago, but at that point, they were one of the top programs in college football. And given the access they have to the DFW area, you could see a scenario where SMU could again be a college football contender with enough resources. So at least that school particularly, I think, makes a lot of sense.
SMU and San Diego State might be great research universities, like my buddy Nigel is saying, but that will only matter on Monday through Friday. It won't matter on Saturday afternoon when they're in the trenches with Utah and Oregon and USC. Well, not USC moving forward, but the thing about it is geographically it might be a fit, and teams are looking to add teams to their conference, obviously because of the movement. But in the end, it doesn't really move the meter that much. I think both teams will be middle of the pack in the Pac-12. It'll be hard for them to compete. Resources, recruiting, it'll be really tough moves for those schools. But conferences like the Pac-12, they do have to fill out the roster, and these are the two teams that they appear to have sights on.
All right, guys, I am monitoring the chat, and obviously people are very excited about the little cat that came in there in Chris Hummer's view. I'll use this as a reminder, though. If you want to be a part of the chat, the only way you can do that is if you are subscribing to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. So please do that. Also, if you like the cat, if you like this video, feel free to hit that like button as well. It spreads the word and gets more people as a part of this party. So everybody kind of had a similar response to this, right? Kind of lukewarm, not too sure about these schools. It doesn't scream excitement. Well, I remember last year when all the conference realignment stuff was really blowing up, and we were talking about the Big 12 potentially stealing Pac-12 members and vice versa, and what this was going to look like, all cutthroat. SMU also had a flirtation with the Big 12. Ultimately, that didn't work out. So when I look at these schools, I think of it as an example of what the Pac-12 thinks of what they're able to bring into the conference. Nigel, what do these two schools in particular, the fact that there were those kind of threats of we could potentially take whoever we want because people want to be a part of the Pac-12, what do these two schools in particular signal to you about just how desperate this conference is to add members?
I'm not sure that the conference is desperate necessarily to add members. At least the conversations that I've had. I mean, you go back to I grew up on the West Coast as a Pac-10 guy. When I played in the Pac-10, and we were doing just fine.
Okay.
Now, obviously, the LA schools were huge, and losing the Southern California market is enormous to this conference. And so I think San Diego State, that is a fit that is there. I just think desperation is probably a strong word.
Yeah.
I think in the end they would like to expand. And just like Chris laid out, the number of households in the Dallas-Fort Worth market, and obviously in Southern California, and things. But I think in the end, the priority is still trying to negotiate this final television deal, and whether that includes streaming and some things like that. What happens with the Pac-12 network and things, and then I think the next tier would be, okay, now what do we do about expansion? So again, we'll see. But I think again, I don't know. I think that there's something to those two schools fitting.
Nigel, Marshall Faulk isn't coming through that door. Eric Dickerson isn't coming through that door. How long before San Diego State and SMU can compete in the Pac-12?
I don't know. I think SMU is a ways away. Mm-hmm. That being said, like Chris laid out, there is money falling out their pockets out there. So if they get the right hire and they set things up correctly, I think they have a chance. San Diego State, I don't actually think is that far away. I mean, you go back to who Utah was when Utah walked in the door. They were a solid program. They had knocked off people at the national level. Obviously, the Sugar Bowl win over Alabama, and then they entered the conference, and they had to take their lumps like anybody else did. But again, they didn't open up a new stadium. They hadn't had, I think San Diego State's had 5 10-win seasons in the last, you go back a number of years.
8
and
seasons.
So, yeah, 5 out of 8. So, and San Diego State walks into any stadium against a Pac-12 school, they are not intimidated by anybody. And so I think that gives them the ability to walk in the door and compete.
Utah had a guy named Urban Meyer. You might have heard of him before.
They did. But the key word was used to, because then he walked out the door. Yeah. And then some guy named Kyle Whittingham, who we found out was actually the puppet master back there, actually took the thing to another level. So we'll see what Brady Hoke and what they've got going down there in San Diego.
All right, guys. Well, we are going to parlay this into a Pac-12 conversation, just, in terms of the current members. So the new schedule is out. We're going to show you some of the notable matchups to get ready for this fall. We got Colorado at Oregon. Oregon's in a lot of these matchups. Excited to see what they do at Washington. Always a fun battle between those two. Utah, USC. Those matches got heated last year. UCLA, USC, Oregon State, Oregon. Always fun when you have those in-state battles in the Pac-12. So among these notable matchups, Chris, what stands out to you?
I have to be hyped for Utah at USC. This was the matchup that determined the Pac-12 this year. They played 2 classics this season. I know the Pac-12 championship game probably didn't go the way USC wanted it to with Caleb Williams' injury, but both games were highly entertaining. And I think these are 2 of the best 4 teams in the Pac-12 once again. And the I know it's not the South anymore, but I would argue the Pac-12 still runs through Utah. And if USC wants to take that next step, it has to beat Utah, a team bringing back 17 starters. This is really going to be USC's first Pac-12 test when you look at the schedule. They have to go to Notre Dame the week before, so they get Notre Dame, Utah back-to-back. I think this is going to tell us a ton about where USC is. I think this is going to tell us a ton about any chance of Caleb Williams repeating his Heisman Trophy bid. I think it's going to be the best game of the year in the Pac-12.
Carl, which game do you have circled?
Utah, to piggyback on what Chris said, Utah is one of those teams that always beats you up. It's a really, really rough deal. I think that USC has to prove that they can play on the line of scrimmage with Utah, and that's what's separating them. Have struggled mightily defensively, stopping the run, stopping people from scoring in general. And Utah is a team that just lines up and really goes at you and pounds the football. In terms of other game, I think UCLA and USC is always exciting. USC got a lot of fanfare with Lincoln Riley coming over, but Chip Kelly, a guy who at one time people thought was the best coach in the country at Oregon, and things had got quiet for him. He's done some really positive things at UCLA. So I think that that's a game that we also have to circle and be ready for, because UCLA, not a lot of people talking about them right now, but they're going to be a team that's going to have to be reckoned with in the Pac-12 this year as well.
Nigel, take me up to your neck of the woods. Anything in that region stand out to you?
Look, I live in the state of Oregon, and I'm going to tell you right now, the best game isn't even on that list.
Oh,
November 11th, 2023, Autzen Stadium will be absolutely rocking when Caleb Williams and the USC Trojans march into Autzen Stadium. The people listen, the state of Oregon hadn't seen USC come through in Autzen Stadium in a while. They haven't played since 2020. USC has not beaten Oregon since 2016. And so to have a chance for those two teams to go at it, and in particular, not in the Coliseum, but have a chance to go at it in Autzen Stadium, I think is going to be an absolute showdown. And by November 11th, we'll know exactly where both these teams stand in terms of having a chance to play for the Pac-12 title. I cannot wait for that one.
Oh, yeah. That game will mean a whole lot. Just one note on Utah, too. We did just recently learn that Cam Rising did tear his ACL during that Rose Bowl game, so has a long road ahead in terms of recovery. And speaking of, we're going to go to some win totals. This is very easy, you guys. I'm going to ask you over under here. So let's start with the Utes. How about it? Their over under win total is 8.5. Chris, over under.
I have a hard time betting against Utah. I know the Cam Rising injury is concerning. There's no guarantee he's ready to go for the regular season. And the schedule's brutal. I think they get UCLA, USC, Oregon. I believe they get Washington as well, in addition to Florida in the non-conference. But I'm not betting against Kyle Whittingham. I'm not betting against a Utah team bringing back the majority of its starters. So over.
Kyle Whittingham has that thing rolling in the right direction, always does. Has been very, very formidable in the Pac-12. I'm going to go over here. I think Utah is over that pretty comfortably.
Ooh.
Can we take a trip to Vegas? Because I'm saying all of us need to put money on the over on this one. If Vegas got them at 8.5, I'm going to go see if I can get myself a second mortgage, because Daddy wants a new car. Yeah, I'm betting definite over on Utah getting more than 8.5 wins.
But don't you know, when everybody is on one thing, you're supposed to bet the opposite. It just automatically jinxes it. I mean, that's tough.
Story of my life, Emily.
You feeling it? I'm a little worried about those first two games, though. You got to go to Baylor and you got to play Florida. You know, they come to your neck of the woods. But also, the Pac-12 has got a lot of great competition this year. So let's go to Colorado. Their win total is 4.5. Carl, I'll start with you. Over, under.
I talked to Coach Prime the other day about one of the recruits that he just got committed to him at the University of Colorado. And
was this after the NFL honors speech when he?
This was before.
Oh, I want to see that reap benefits. That was awesome.
so one thing that he always says, he says, "We coming." So I believe him. I'm gonna say that Colorado was over 4.5 wins this season.
Nigel, what do you think?
This one's gonna be tough. You know, I want to believe in Coach Prime. But when I look at a lot of their transfers and a lot of their impact guys, I'm seeing quarterback, defensive back, tight end. You know what I'm not seeing a whole lot of? Where you actually make your money in the offensive, defensive lines. And so, you know, I look at their schedule at TCU. I mean, what a rough way to get your whole – I understand why we're trying to move Arizona State game up, because I'm not trying to start my career going to TCU either. I just think their schedule is just a little tough for them right now. I'm probably going to take the under on this one, but I think you're going to get a lot of close games and a much more competitive Colorado team than we've seen the last few years.
Colorado's going to be better. It's hard for Colorado not to be better. They were the worst Power 5 team in college football last year. They're one of the worst teams in college football last year, period. But they're not going over this year. I'd take the under pretty easily. They're going to be much improved, way more competitive, but it's going to take Deion Sanders some time to build this thing out.
All right, so Nigel is not taking the road trip to Vegas for this one. How about Kenny Dillingham in his first season as head coach? Got Jaden Rashada to work with, some excitement there. Their win total is set at 6.5. Nigel, over under.
You know, I go back to just watching Arizona State and how much talent they've had on that football team. They got guys there. They've never been able to get out of their own way. And I think that's going to be the issue that Coach Dillingham's going to have to deal with. I don't know if he's a disciplinarian, but he better figure out a way to get that done. I know he's a young guy. He's very enthusiastic about the job, but he's going to have to lay down the law there because right now, I mean, you look at, they've been one of the most penalized teams over the last, I don't even know. I ran out of looking at years. And so they've got to find ways to just stop beating themselves before they could ever talk about winning 7-8 games.
Right now with Arizona State and Coach Dillingham signing Jaden Rashada, I'm going to be honest with you. Maybe I'm just feeling optimistic about some of these new coaches.
Ooh.
I'm going to go over. I think Arizona State goes over. I think that Jaden Rashada comes on the scene and plays big. And I got to give Kenny Dillingham some respect for what he did with Bo Nix this past year at Oregon. I think that he's going to do a good job. I'm going to go over.
The Pac-12 is so loaded this year. Not every team can go over. I want to say Arizona State's going to be much better. I expect them to be much better. The schedule is super friendly the first 3 weeks. You get a down Oklahoma State in week 2, Southern Utah, Fresno State. Maybe you start the season 3-0. But the Pac-12 is so deep this year. I have a hard time seeing Arizona State, a team that had to turn over half of its roster via the transfer portal, hitting that win total this year. I'm going under, but I think the future's bright with Kenny Dillingham as head coach.
Every time Chris Hummer comes on the show, he says something that is preposterous. Okay? He just said that the Pac-12 is loaded. I haven't heard Pac-12 and loaded in the same sentence probably since Pete Carroll was at USC. All right? The Pac-12
put it back in the lexicon, Carl, because it is loaded in 2023.
We'll revisit this conversation about mid-October.
I think there's a lot of depth.
Bring me back on for that whatever show for that one. I want to revisit. We can write it down. We can take a picture because I cannot wait to see.
I got a column in my phone that says wild stuff that Chris Hummer and Brandon Marcello says. I'm gonna add your name to this list, Nigel. All right, because I keep all the receipts in here.
I like it. Okay, so Nigel, we'll reach back out in a few months and we'll revisit this. I kind of agree with you guys though, Carl. You can put my name in your notes app as well. I really do think that it's such a deep conference and it starts at the quarterback position. But we're going to parlay this discussion into a discussion about the transfer portal because, of course, you got Arizona State is one of those schools that has a ton of players in the transfer portal, 27 to be exact, the most in the Pac-12. But if you look at the college football landscape as a whole, check this out. The Pac-12 is Pac Portal having 131 portal additions. Yes, it's pretty top heavy with Arizona State and Colorado both over 25. But 6 of the 12 teams have added 10 plus players in the portal. So it's really all over the place in the Pac-12. We have our portal expert here, Chris Hummer. First off, Chris, why do you think the Pac-12 has been so active in the portal?
I think it's just a way for rosters to get better. And the Pac-12 clearly hasn't been competitive nationally, at least the last couple of years. And this is a way to scale the gap very quickly. We've seen a lot of success with it. Oregon State, I think, launched its recent renaissance via the transfer portal. USC went from a losing record to the cusp of college football playoff contention via the transfer portal. We're seeing Arizona State and Colorado follow a similar blueprint. So I just think it allows you to get better really quickly. And the Pac-12, great weather, great places to live, I think has really feasted on the transfer portal in large part because of that.
will happily transfer to LA if need be. Carl, let's ask you this: which non-quarterback transfer you think is going to make the biggest impact in year one?
I'm going to go A.J. Cornelius, offensive lineman from Rhode Island that transferred to Oregon. He's a offensive lineman that's going to get drafted into the National Football League. Could be a guy that comes in, make an immediate impact, and be in next year's draft. He was a stud. Everybody in the country wanted him. He's an immediate plug-and-play player for the University of Oregon. I think he's going to be very dominant and add to those trenches, like Nigel was talking about, how important it is to have great players in the trenches. And I think he's going to have a huge impact for Oregon and help them tremendously in both the run game and the pass game overall on offense. He can zone block. He can do gap schemes. He's very good pulling. He's very good in space and at the point of attack. I think he's going to be a high-impact guy for the University of Oregon.
Yeah, I think I got to go with I'm going to be Captain Obvious here, Coach. I'm going to go with Travis Hunter at Colorado. Look, Colorado has not played a lick of defense in who knows how long. And now you've got one of the premier corners in the country transferring back, 5-star recruit, everything, ball skills, length, footwork, has the ability, even like we're seeing here on the screen, play offense and help them on that side of the football. And then you think about the fact of how he's got familiarity with the system. Obviously, Charles Kelly bringing in some of what he did there at Alabama into Boulder as well. And you think of all the names of the great defensive back play that we've seen at Alabama, from the Patrick Surtains going down, go as far back as you want to. And I think Travis Hunter is going to be that next one. And when you think about the fact of an impact guy that doesn't play quarterback, when you have the ability to have one guy on the field and say, listen, we don't have to worry about that side. We can rotate coverage away from him. We can do this with him. Oh, you have a premier receiver? We're going to have Travis just follow him all over the field. I think that's where he's going to have his biggest impact. And I think that's my guy that I want to watch for the next season.
There are a ton of directions I could go with this, and Travis Hunter's a great answer. He's a potential top 10 pick in the future. He's as good as it gets in college football. But there's only one leading receiver in the Pac-12 from last year, and he's a transfer. He's Dorian Singer, going from Arizona to USC. And USC needs another receiver to step up with Jordan Addison heading to the NFL. So they added arguably the best receiver in the Pac-12 to their room. That room's super deep. Still got Taj Washington, Mario Williams, and now you're adding Dorian Singer to it. So I think Caleb Williams is going to have plenty of weapons to choose from, and Dorian Singer's as good as it gets in the Pac-12 in terms of production. So I think he's going to have a huge role for USC this year and play a big part in USC's potential contender status.
I love it. Those are just 3 of, again, 131 transfers in the Pac-12. If you are a fan of the Pac-12, like this video. We would love to get to 40 likes. We're pretty close, so feel free to like this video. Also, make sure that you have your rosters handy for watching your teams next season with all the newcomers there. And as a reminder, I'm monitoring the chat right now, and our friend Eric is saying, good job, Carl. Chris is drinking some of that good rum. So agreeing with you there.
Hey, if anybody wants to share some of it, like, I'm here for it.
Happily. I love it.
A little early, but all day.
You just hang out and, play with your cat and what else is going on in the Hummer Home today. A lot of fun. All right, guys, we have one more discussion that we want to get to, and I'm very excited about this one. If you watched the Super Bowl last night, you noticed it was history-making for the first time ever. 2 black quarterbacks starting in the big game. Our 24/7 sports writer, Xavier Handy Hamilton, actually, he recently published a piece all about just overall the development of the black quarterback. He says that it's not a coincidence that we had the history this year. It's actually a result of circumstance. He presented some pretty cool facts too. He said, in the NFL, 5 black quarterbacks started a playoff game this year, whereas in 2018, just 5 black quarterbacks started in week 1. So he kind of argues, though, that it's almost a trickle-up effect, that it starts from recruiting. And so here at 24/7 Sports, we love to talk about recruiting. Get this, 10, you're looking at them right now, of the top 25 quarterbacks in the 2023 class are black. That's double the amount from last year. Carl, you hear me say that, and you think what?
I think that we've made some changes in the right direction. It was a time years ago where if you were a black athletic guy that played the quarterback position, you would most likely be moved to receiver or defensive back, specifically if you got beat out early in your career. So what we've had here lately is patience in developing the toughest position to play in football. So it was almost going to be a guarantee. I can go way back to Bobby Newsome and Eric Crouch at Nebraska. If you got beat out at the quarterback position and you were black and you were athletic, you were going to be asked to change positions almost immediately. You weren't going to be given seasons and springs to develop as a passer, to develop as a game. And every quarterback needs that opportunity. And so now guys, more coaches have went to systems where you want your best athlete at quarterback. So that's helped the black quarterback, and it's helped them improve as passers. And so now it's not the stigma that it used to be in terms of, well, he's not smart enough. He's looking to run too much. Now everybody's looking for a quarterback that can run. Now everybody has simplified their systems. So there's not the stigma there, even though there were a lot of black quarterbacks in the past who could have learned any system that you put in front of them, but they weren't given the opportunity. Now you're seeing guys get that opportunity, and it was amazing to see Mahomes and Jalen Hurts start in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I just go back to what, I remember being a kid and watching the Super Bowl, Washington Redskins versus the Denver Broncos. And look, I didn't care about the Redskins whatsoever, but I was rooting for Doug Williams because he changed the way I think people saw what the black quarterback was able to do by winning that Super Bowl. And look, it took obviously decades later for it to happen again, but it's kind of become a non-story, to be honest with you. I don't even remember having this conversation when Russell Wilson won it, about a decade ago. But I think what it's also shown is the way that the quarterback position has changed, not just in the NFL, but college on down to high school. The days of even Doug Williams would not be seen the same as a quarterback. And now, obviously, the guy's got skill off the charts. But if you are a guy who's not super mobile, if you're a guy who's got to stand in the pocket and just deliver and you can't really do a whole lot else, you're kind of a thing of the past. Because as a former defensive coordinator, you just do not put the same type of pressure on me. You go back to Patrick Mahomes last night, pressure, everything breaks down on a bum ankle, is able to run for a 20, 30-yard scamper, and how that changed the game. What the quarterback position is asked to do now, whether you're talking the RPO game or even taking that out of the equation and just allowing to extend plays with your feet, I think all those things has led to coaches and coordinators and everybody saying, look, we've got to find a guy who can do this. And I don't really care what color he is, because if we don't get this done, I'm going to be standing on the street shaking a cup to feed my family. And so I think all those things put together has put us in this situation. I'm glad that we saw what we saw last night. And I'm even looking more further into the future, where this is honestly a non-story. And when you look at, I think, Xavier's conversation or that article that he had, I think pretty soon we're getting to the point now, 5 black quarterbacks have won the Heisman Trophy since 2013. When in the previous, whatever it was, 24 years, there were 5 total. And so I just think it's gotten to the point now where it's not even a conversation, and I'm actually looking forward to it.
I love that you asked that too, because I'm seeing some comments too, that race is really a charged issue, and especially in the comments right now, everybody's saying, why are we talking about this? Why is this a discussion? And they're saying that race shouldn't matter when it comes to talking about the quarterback position. Carl, what's your response to that?
It shouldn't, but it has, and what Nigel has said is correct. I'm glad we're getting to a point where it's not the question that it used to be, but it was very much an issue for a while. I was a high school coach for a long time, and I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of different coaches about the quarterback position and the way it was evaluated and the way that it was looked at. It has changed tremendously. I also think guys like Yogi Roth, guys like Trent Dilfer, who did a great job with Elite 11, they have started from a prospect standpoint, started making black quarterbacking a non-issue too, because those were 2 guys that really just got into, was the kid good enough to play the position or not? And as those things started to transpire, we have been in a better position in terms of the guys who are getting the opportunity to play quarterback.
Yeah, and Emily, if I can add to it, I think 24/7 has had something to do with it, because I remember the days of the dual threat. There's the dual threat guy, and then there's the pro style guy. Well, the pro style guy was going to the USCs and the Penn States, and the dual threat guy was probably going to go to the Nebraskas and never get a chance to play in the pros again. The moment we stopped looking at it that way and just said, look, who can play quarterback period, whatever they're being asked to do. I think it also just shaped a lot of those conversations. And again, I think the rise of 7-on-7 football has changed things because a lot of black quarterbacks coming out of black neighborhoods where maybe they weren't getting the same type of training. Well, now those guys are getting year-round training. They're going to 7-on-7 tournaments in different parts of the country where they're being asked to recognize coverage, deliver the football on time, all those things, which has helped their development for when they got on to college and then eventually the NFL. So all these things were a culmination. We still have to talk about it because it's not just a thing of the past. It's still here. But eventually, as those barriers continue to break down, then it becomes a non-conversation.
I think it's very healthy that we've eliminated terms like dual threat quarterback because it certainly created a stigma around who plays those positions. And it's great that we're getting to a point where the conversation isn't as necessary as it once was, but I would argue it's still very necessary. We're not that far removed from respected NFL people saying Lamar Jackson should play wide receiver coming into the NFL draft. Lamar Jackson was one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen in person on the college level. He's a Heisman Trophy winner for a reason. The idea that people were discussing that is absurd. And I don't think you would have had that conversation about a white quarterback. So I think it's important to keep having these conversations. I thought Xavier wrote an excellent piece. And we also just, in general, have an issue with decision makers in these positions not being people of color. I think there's only 2 minority NFL owners. I think there's only a handful of minority NFL GMs on the college level. We have fewer black coaches heading into 2023 than we did in 2022. And this is all a trickle-down effect. We're seeing more black quarterbacks, which is great. We should see more black quarterbacks in these positions. But until the system itself changes around it, it's always going to be a problem. So I think it's an important conversation to be had, certainly.
Yeah, Carl, along those lines, from your perspective, where is there room for growth?
Well, there's room for growth and just continuing to develop the position. Chris brought up a great point when he talked about Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson was also coached by Bobby Petrino, who's one of the legendary offensive coaches. So it's just about him getting the opportunity to be developed. But if you also look at it, I'm very close with guys who are on the staff at Louisville during that time. And when Lamar was a freshman, they did have him work out as a punt returner because they were trying to get his explosiveness on the field. And his mom got very active in that situation that he was only going to play quarterback. So some of those things are important. But his mom gets a lot of flack now in the NFL because she handles his contract stuff and he doesn't have a traditional agent. So some of those things behind the scenes in terms of the way that guys get help and that situation gets dealt with is also important. But I think the most important thing when you talk about decision makers is, does somebody feel like there's pressure that if he goes with a black quarterback and it doesn't work, does he feel more pressure than if he went with a more traditional quarterback in terms of what it looks like to other people? Is he going to get more grace in that? And I think that that's a conversation that always comes into play. Guys have to keep developing. And I would tell a quarterback, whether you were black or white, if you're going to play in the highest level of football, you have to be able to drop back and complete passes. And if you can't do that, they're going to be looking to move you as soon as they can.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. And I love that you brought that up, Carl, because, ultimately it's about your performance on the field. And we understand that. But, the thing that I'm actually looking forward to, Emily, is, you look at a lot of these, let's just look at the Super Bowl last night, right? Sirianni, former quarterback, Division III level, moves his way up, becomes a coordinator. Shane Steichen, as a kid, I recruited. This is how old I am. I recruited him out of Oak Ridge High School, and now he's a offensive coordinator of the Philadelphia Eagles. That pipeline that you were a high-level quarterback, moved up, and now once your playing career is over, hey, you want to coach, son? Because we think you have something. Well, now as you're seeing more of these black quarterbacks who are going on and being successful at the college and now professional level, how many of them are going to become the next Byron Leftwich, moving up into the ranks, becoming NFL coordinators, and now having a chance to be the next NFL head coach because of how they've moved up the ranks, because of being in that position where you had to understand everybody getting lined up. You had to be the leader. You had to make the calls. You had to make the checks. You had to understand defense and all the things that a quarterback's asked to do. So I'm really looking forward to hopefully some of the conversations we're having about coaching as well, and on into the management levels. You see the John Lynch's of the world and things like that, where because of this this adaptation because of what we're seeing in the growth of the black quarterback, actually leading to some of those things that we're seeing off the field, the decision makers of head coaches, general managers, because those guys have continued to move on in their careers because we have a much higher supply of guys who've done it at a high level. So I'm looking forward to hopefully 10, 15 years from now, we're not even having conversations about black head coaches because we're seeing guys like go down the list, the Russell Wilsons go on, guys that we watched last night, maybe moving on into coaching.
Emily, everything is about our personal stigmas because just like you look at a Lamar Jackson, who's a great athlete, we have to fight to keep him from getting his position moved. I coached a kid named Aquill Glass that was 2-time SWAC Offensive Player of the Year and broke pretty much every record in that league. I coached him in high school, and he threw in front of 44 Division I college coaches one day, and they were concerned because he wasn't a great runner. So in that case, the fact that he was a black 6'5" quarterback who could make all the throws, but he wasn't seen as an elite speed guy, that made people scratch their head. Well, wait a minute, you don't mean he can run? And that was just in 2016 when he came out of high school. So everything is about your perception. Everything is about the way you see it and the way you look at it. And the best way for people to deal with prejudice or biasness is for them to address it in themselves first, because how you feel in yourself is going to be what you outwardly deliver when you're evaluating guys.
We will tie a bow on it there. Perfect message there, Carl. All right, we like to do a fun thing on this show where at the very end we download, right? We talked about a lot on today's show, and it was so exciting. So we're calling this our College Football Today takeaway. So it's just kind of one final thought, one last thing. We're not going to rehash some old arguments. I know that we like to do that sometimes. Carl and Chris, let's keep it civil here. Nigel, what is your final takeaway from today?
Well, my final takeaway is I need to have a conversation with my wife, Emily, and I need to let her know that Chris Hummer has told me that I need to go back into coaching. If the standard price for tag for a coach is $8 million all of a sudden because of LSU, I'm in the wrong spot. So it was great to see it. Carl, you can call me on my yacht in about 5 years because I'm going back. This is ridiculous if $8 million is the going rate. Thank you, Chris.
Chris, I'll let you go next.
I learned that my cat just has a lot of star qualities is what it comes down to. She just has to be on camera. And I also learned, I want to point this out, that Carl finally agrees with me about Texas' expectations in 2023.
Carl?
What I learned today is that Chris Hummer is the first full-blooded American male that I know that owns a cat. And it really just blew my mind seeing that.
We have video of that. Can we see? There we go.
It completely distracted me from me being able to do my job. It blew my mind. I wasn't expecting Chris Hummer to own a cat. And it's a conversation that him and I are going to have to continue to have offline. He's down there in Texas. I know it's somebody down there that can get this man a dog.
I have a dog as well, Carl. I have a dog. I can bring him next time. He's just a little louder than my cat, so it might be a little bit more of a distraction.
To be fair, I did hear a dog bark at some point, so I'm not looking at Nigel down there. I know that your dog was antsy to get in there, so cat would be way more chill for sure, quieter, right? Was that you,
no
Nigel?
No question about it.
Yeah.
My dog is nuts anyway. My dog came on this show, my little cube, my little corner of this screen would be done. That dog would take it'd be over. So he's locked out.
I love it. My final thought, not to pile on Chris here, but I thought the way that you handled it was perfect. You said, excuse me, I have some great college football analysis that I need to get through, so can you just move to the side? I think the fact, oh no, producer in my ear just said it was perfect. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it there with that just wonderful joke. Thank you guys so much for all of the great discussion on today's show. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. To the viewer, we are here every Monday and Wednesday at 5 o'clock. And to make sure that you don't miss us, feel free to subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. We'll see you Wednesday.